Today's talk is the third annual All About Energy talk. It's hard to believe that I've been doing this for 3 years now, but I have. So about once a year, I just make a webinar just to talk about energy and different sensations people have. For anyone who's new, these are free webinars, but if you do feel moved to donate, there's a donation button on the right-hand side of the blog, and it goes through PayPal, which is secure, and I think most of us now are pretty comfortable with the whole online donating and sending finances that way, or at least reasonably so, at least a lot more compared to like early 2000. So any donations are appreciated, but not necessary. As many of you know, I'll free flow for a while, but this one's really meant to be more of a question and answer to talk about different experiences you may be having and to share back and reflect with you and to offer you perhaps some tools and ways to fine tune your understanding of your energy, because that's really what we're interested in. We're not really interested more broadly about the energy of the world or anything. We're interested in our energy and the things we feel. And I'm happy to speak personally for anything that any of you may want to share. And anyone who's new, what we do is we just have people write down in the chat pod on the right-hand side, and then I just read it and answer the question. So to me, when I talk about energy, energy is everything. Energy is life, and energy is consciousness, and energy is love, and all those words kind of all become the same. That's the nature of what I would call higher truth, that space of oneness where everything blends together and it simply is. And that's really the ocean of life that we're all part of. We're all in that soup together. But obviously we live in bodies, and so we also have this interesting paradox of being in a body, being separate, and yet we still have the same stuff inside of all of us. And so that energy that's in us is still part of the grand scheme of energy all around us. It's just moved itself into a certain shape, right? Here's my shape. I'm Jim Tolles. This is the shape I'm in. And I'll be in this shape for a little while. And this is a changing shape. So one of the big spiritual truths, I think this was in my 9 that I posted today, is that life is change. It's very Buddhist. But, the Buddhists are right, that life is change. Things are constantly changing. And though I look static to you, and I'm sure all of you look static if you look into the mirror, which means you just look like you're the same. We're not. Things are constantly changing and shifting inside of our bodies. Cells are dying. Cells are being regrown. Like there's this constant movement and shift. And energy is all part of that. It's all part of that deeper flow, and things are moving around and changing in that inner river. And eventually we'll have to let go of these forms that we currently inhabit, which to me is always one of the reasons why the spiritual path is such an urgent one. None of us know how long we get to be here. We don't know how long we're going to flow in this particular energetic form before it's done. So there's no real reason to wait to embrace love, to embrace your dreams, to explore life, to heal old wounds so you can more fully embrace and enjoy life. That really is the urgency of it. But yet nothing is ever lost. I mean, that's where energy really makes a lot of sense, because we're just energy. We'll just change shape when we die. We move into a different form, so nothing is ever lost. And so sometimes you'll hear these terms that people talk about in spirituality, but they don't really understand things like that. And there's other ways that people talk about, you cannot be touched, and that's true, because they can't take away your energetic essence. It's always going to be here. Even if you're dead, it's still here. So they've not actually touched you. The physical form has simply gone away, and the energy has changed shape. And so with all that sort of interesting truth that we abide in, we're these amazing feeling experiential creatures that experience energy in a whole bunch of different ways. I know there's a couple of you that, because of awakening, suddenly you got thrust more firmly into energetic awareness because of feeling that inner shift and change happening so actively inside of you. And for some people who are going to be doing more with that energy, let's just say, it's this way that you, I don't want to say, I guess, guide energy and perhaps, how you help heal and, connect with others in the world. having those sensitivities, your spiritual awakening moves you towards understanding them more. And so in needing to understand more, you're probably having all sorts of experiences that you don't fully understand. And there's all sorts of ways that these energetic experiences can show up. Since we're all one, that's part of what fuels a lot of psychic awareness. So we already can kind of sense what's going on with someone else because we're still connected. That connection is still there, even though it seems like we're in separate bodies. So when you're feeling those different things from other people now, before maybe you could, now you can. It's like, well, what do I do with this information? Do I tell somebody to do something? If I feel like they're making a mistake or whatnot. How do I be with all that extra information? Because it isn't in some respects, to the mind level anyway, is a type of information. You're getting these different things and different inputs, but how do you interpret them into anything meaningful? And of course, that is partly one of my gifts, that I'm pretty good. I wouldn't even say I'm not that I would ever say I'm the best at anything, because that's such an ego thing, but I wouldn't even say I'm like one of the stronger ones at doing this. I've just been practicing. Some people are much quicker and get much deeper in easier interpretations of this is what's happening with something. Like they can get the full-on pictures, like, oh, this is what happened in childhood. It's, to me, that sort of energetic sensitivity and the layers of interpretation that happen. It's no different than what happens with our eyes. We're just better trained at doing that with our eyes than we are through that energetic sensitivity side of things. But you can still practice and you do get better at it. One of the words from different spiritual traditions, don't ask me which one, it's something coming out of the Hindu traditions, is the word kriyas. And so what happens is the body makes involuntary movements with a lot of energy moving through it. And so it can happen sometimes in some of my sessions with some of my students who are particularly sensitive. And to me, it's like water hitting rocks in a river, right? Things start to get frothy and weird, and there's kind of these twitches that somebody's body will do. And so the encouragement there, if you ever have those types of little kriyas, or just sometimes it's very gentle swirling, so just breathing into it, breathing into your low belly, into your low back to ground yourself. And, where things are particularly tight and tense, breathe into that and pay attention to it. See what the rock in the river is to help it dissolve. And as it dissolves, then the water flows more cleanly, easily, and there's less jerking about, less going on in your body, which, especially for some people who've never had these experiences, who weren't energetically sensitive to begin with, to suddenly go from that to being energetically sensitive and being bounced around like, you're on a road trip going through the rock field is just very, very upsetting and jarring, literally and metaphorically. Well, welcome to user who just logged on. If you wouldn't mind putting a name there, it'd be nice so I know who you are, and especially if you ask questions later. There's all kinds of different common energetic stuff that people feel, from heat. It's very common. People's bodies heat up. Mine heats up like a Human Torch. If I really get flowing with energy. And in earlier parts of my awakening, that was definitely very much the case. Now my energy is much more stabilized, which is nice. So it's another thing where this too shall pass. These things come and these things go in certain waves. And definitely on the topic of awakening, I just embrace anybody moving through this or I encourage anybody going through this to embrace it, that it's a sacred time and it's not going to stay there. The awakened energy does, but there's a certain quality of that intensity that it seems to just kind of want to relax and die down eventually. I don't know if that's always the case for everyone, but all I can say is, embrace the moment, because we don't really know what's going to happen in the future. And we can't predict it, and putting things off for another time when things seem convenient is just an ego game, because we don't even actually know what convenience is, or, if things are going to be more convenient later on, or what that means. What we're usually trying to do is just get away from discomfort. Whenever energy is particularly strong, there is still that human tendency to see that as a threat, that, it can bring different intensities physically. And of course, if you meet other people who are energetically in particularly strong alignment for you, that there's just a stronger connections happen, that can be really upsetting, can kind of scare people away. And so there's an encouragement there to be curious, not to go running into the arms of somebody else or whatever like that, but just to be curious whenever these energetic things happen to crop up. I know I do, because obviously I connect to a lot of people around the world. And every now and then somebody's particularly energetically significant to me, and I may not immediately know how to interpret that. And since there's all kinds of energies, how would you be able to interpret everything all the time? And so in those instances, I just can be curious and be reaching out and saying like, hey, I'm just getting to know you. I'm trying to get a sense, because some people come to me aren't students. They're, or at least they're not students for me. And, but there's still an alignment, still a connection. So maybe it's a friendship, maybe it's a supporter. There's all sorts of different roles, and obviously not everything can get labeled a certain way. Different lessons that we learn from each other. Definitely, and I don't know why I'm focusing so much on awakening today, but I seem to be. But and most of what I say still applies for anyone just on the conscious gradual path, which is what most people are on. Most people have some glimpses or experiences that they call spiritual that help them get started, which is fantastic. But the conscious path is the one that we all ultimately end up on, awakening or not, where you have to choose to embrace the spiritual path, to grow and to embrace life and to live from this deeper space of truth and love. Plenty of people who awaken actually don't. They just hold on for dear life and are miserable for some time. And it seems like the energies do die down and they just kind of stay wherever they were, with some minor changes and certain amounts of awareness. I don't want to overgeneralize that, but I've seen that happen. Because a lot of people who awaken, because awakening is a spontaneous arising, they didn't want it, had no interest in it, weren't spiritual to begin with. But going through awakening shifts tends to go through cycles of bringing in people to help you learn, to help you find different blocks, different things about yourself. And so these different energies that come in show you more things about yourself, mirror different things. People that you wouldn't have been interested in before show up, and they reflect different angles of you. It's like, if you start setting mirrors up all around you. And, oftentimes the people that are most upsetting to us are showing us part of our shadow, right? They're standing behind us, and they're saying, oh, da 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 da. And I was like, no, I don't want to see that. Why are you showing me that? Hi, user. What's your name, if you don't mind me knowing? The question I have is, do you feel that many physical disturbances that might be called health issues can be dealt with energetically or by emotional release work? Can I have a specific question as it relates to you? Because that's a general one, and that's where we get in trouble in the spiritual path. I don't particularly care for general questions because you can answer them like 9 or 10 ways, and that can all be true. I prefer more personal questions that relate to you and your own experience and what you're learning. That's just so important, because otherwise what we can do with the generalities, we can hide. The ego likes to hide. We can coach the situation into getting an answer that we want to hear rather than hearing the truth that we need. So these are really important things to understand about how we formulate questions. So while I answer most questions, to me, what's most important is the truth and helping you to understand yourself. And by and large, because of this, and this is a real problem in the New Age world, where a lot of people are trying to use energy, and often poorly, to self-diagnose different physical things, it forces me to actually have to say that you should always go see a Western doctor first, because that is still part of the divine magic of this world. It's a part of our healing repertoire. Why would we go into anything and leave out some of the most important tools? Right? We have a saw, we have a hammer, we have a chisel. We're going to use them all. We're not going to say, I don't want to use a hammer in building this house. It just doesn't make any sense. So I have to say that because of that mentality that unfortunately is very common in the spiritual world. Now, as we step through that and we use all the things that are available to us, there's a lot of things that we can address energetically. But, and I was having this great conversation with a friend right now. So there are different types of energy work and they go to different depths. And the thing about a lot of these energy things is as long as the core issue is still there, the energetic issue is going to reappear again. So if the deeper issue is around self-worth, coming from an issue with your mother yelling at you and calling you a good-for-nothing child, your whole childhood, right? Here's the core issue. And that's grown into chronic back pain. So you can go to whatever energetic healer you want to, right? And they're working on your back and you go to the chiropractor, but the issue keeps coming back. The back problems keep coming back. What's happening? The core problem is still there. And that's partially, it's a multiple things, right? So you get the emotional, physiological, energetic, and psychological stuff are all bound up together. So we don't really separate them out, right? When I speak about energy separately, that's really kind of a misnomer. And I am saying it isn't everything. So you start to unwind through your own work this whole issue, and you grieve the issue, and you grieve it in your body. And as that issue lets go, a lot of the physicality does realign itself because you've dealt with a deeper issue. If you're just doing some sort of energetic clearing, you'll keep going and going. They keep clearing and clearing, and maybe you're having emotional releases, but you're not really getting to it because you're not really going into it. You just kind of want it gone. Hi, Elizabeth. I've had strong symptoms at different times, and I seem to get that it's energy, so I go into the feeling. It seems that the grief comes up when I allow it, and the symptoms go away. Well, then it sounds like you already have an answer to your question. Yeah, that's essentially, what we do when we're confident that it is energy, when we go into our issues. And here's the thing, it's never going to hurt you to breathe in to an issue. You just breathe into it. And if the physical issue remains, then that's more encouragement to go see a doctor. Thank you for the comment, Elizabeth. You helped open up a side of the topic that I'm glad that we could discuss today. Because, as I said, there's this part of the world that's trying to self-diagnose itself or always just do stuff with energetically and kind of swears off the scientific Western methodology, which doesn't make any sense. The spiritual path, energy is in everything, embraces everything, so there's nothing that we're going to leave out as far as our healing tools. And I definitely find that as shifts come through us in life, just generally spiritual shifts, you can start to notice different shifts in your own energy where it kind of pulls you in. So that's the kind of sense of coming home. And so in a coming home moment, it's not necessarily even that you're physically tired. It's just you start to lose interest. Right? That interest in going out, doing stuff with friends, or doing other active things starts to dissolve, and it's this way the energy is kind of pulling itself into you, into the next thing. And so you kind of drop into that contracted space in perhaps a more gentle way. In awakening, it's not usually gentle. It's more like hyperventilating like this. But other people, it's more gentle, starts to pull you in. And so the encouragement is to just trust that pull. Right, so that's starting to follow that energetic, intuitive awareness of your own that says, oh, it's time to go and it's time to heal something or self-nourish. And then eventually, the thing works itself out and then you re-expand. And that moves through expansions and contractions. And to me, this is my general theory. I'm interested in everybody's experiences. But I think the more open we are and the more we work through issues, the more there is a general sort of flow of growth and renewal and rest that we all sort of work through. And for me personally, I'm very seasonal. So there's definitely a time where, I'm going into rest. Usually, around November, I'm kind of diving down and come out around March or April. And I kind of build up steam energetically into the things I'm doing actively in the world. Harvest time is definitely August, September, sometimes in July for me, where I've got a lot of energy, a lot of things I'm growing and cultivating. And then I dive back down again, right? These are my sort of macro energy cycles that I move through. And so paying attention to your own energy in this way can be very, very helpful, because we're not living in a 9 to 5, 50 work week body. That's just not realistic in any sort of way, and it's not really the way human beings were doing things for most of mankind. A lot of what we're doing right now is unlike anything that human beings have ever done. The 9 to 5 lifestyle, what we're doing with fashion and our bodies, how we're eating, all these things that how we're sleeping, all these things that were not issues, we've created and turned into issues. So a lot of people end up with chronic fatigue and low energy, not because that there's anything necessarily energetically wrong. It's because they're doing too much, poorly self-nourishing, and not sleeping well. So that's not even an energetic issue in the way we're talking about today. I mean, it is an energy issue because you're just not caring for yourself, not putting the right fuel into the tank. You're not turning the car off occasionally. And so these types of things are issues that we've created for ourselves. So coming back to your own awareness of how your energy feels, what your needs are, is really important. And you're going to set up boundaries at a times that other people are not going to like, right? Some people are like, well, why are you doing all this sort of stuff with food? And they're like, no, this is just what feels right and nourishing to me. And it's like, you sleep too much. It's like, no, this is what I need for sleep. And you should work harder or work more. It's like, no, this is the appropriate amount of work for me. Right? It has nothing to do with being lazy. Lazy is like one of the dirty words in Western culture, to get labeled as lazy or something like that. It's immediately followed up by, making you feel worthless or like a waste of space. I mean, these awful terms that people have. So I'm just throwing out, the fact that you're going to go against some cultural norms, but the cultural norms are stupid and harmful. Hi, Elizabeth. Next question is, do you think that most things could be dealt with energetically? I'm not against medicine, but I feel like it fragments the body. How do we know where the line is? Well, I think you have to continue to delve into your own ego assumptions. What's hiding behind those sort of questions is important, because a lot of times what we find out is we're scared. We're scared of being hurt, or something bad happening to us, and there's a lot of hidden presumptions. So to me, this is the type of question that taking a step back into your journal is really helpful, to say, what's really going on. Ultimately, medicine is about healing us and helping us, and different issues, I think we're human beings, so taking a multi-pronged healing approach makes sense. So going back to the back issue, right? Seeing, what sort of issues come up intuitively for you when you journal about what's going on in your back, practicing yoga and doing, different physical postures, right, to help you sit up and strengthen that. So it's like each different level, like, builds onto it. And then eventually we're all smart. Elizabeth, you're smart. Sean's smart. Kavitha's smart. We're all smart about our bodies. If we let ourselves be, we'll figure it out. I know, Alyssa, you just figured something out recently, and you're feeling way better for it. So these types of things, it's like with perseverance and engagement, right? That being in that present moment, we'll figure it out. And then if something, to your point, does feel like it fragments, it's right, it's not healthy for your body. So the thing that immediately comes to mind is what some of the antidepressants do to people who are energetically sensitive. They hate it. They absolutely hate it. I don't know that I've ever talked to anybody who's like, oh yeah, antidepressants are fun. If they're energetically sensitive, they hate it. Out the door, they feel foggy and don't feel like they can really even deal with life. It's just like living in a haze. So that sort of fragmentation, right? Then you're more clear about. You're welcome, Elizabeth. So energetically is inherently pragmatic to me. It's like, what's working? You're staying engaged, you're staying in the present moment. We're already in the present moment. This is a spiritual truth. And we do the best we can. So what other questions do people have about energy? Hi, Mari. I hope I'm saying your name right. I feel as though I'm going through my own awakening, but I'm struggling with how I'm feeling because I don't know anyone who has experienced this. Feeling grounded, unsure where and whom to turn to. Any advice on how I can manage this and learn to trust, accept what's happening to me energetically. Well, trust comes from within. That's just how that is, that you have to make a point and say, I'm going to trust me. I'm going to sit down with whatever's coming up. I'm going to start to trust me. Knowing other people have experienced awakening doesn't really actually get you anything. So now you know me. Here I am. Like, I awakened in 2007, and I have not been the same since. My writing opened up in 2007, didn't close down. I didn't realize what I'd had until later on. I mean, I knew, but I also didn't know, right? Because that's sort of lack of trust. So I understand the issue, right? Who teaches us about this? Well, I do, but it's not something you have at high school, or if you're homeschooled, or most of the other places, right? So the first step is always just trusting what's happening inside. And the deep breathing and relaxing inwards is important because it helps you to get out of the fight or flight response that we're just so deeply ingrained to go into, right? Anytime something new and the unknown go hand in hand, and we have a huge fear of the unknown because, well, in the past, right, evolutionarily speaking, that something was unknown potentially could be a threat. And so if something's a threat, it could kill us. So there's this constant concern physiologically for anything that might kill us. Because, if you didn't have that mentality, right, and it was an actual danger, it was an actual tiger about to jump out and eat you, and you didn't have that on guard, the readying of the inner resources to run, right, heartbeat going faster, all the hormones and neurotransmitters that get released into the bloodstream to prepare the body, right? And so there's certain areas like our hips and shoulders where we're getting a buildup of energy to do something to protect ourselves. And so the breath is a deprogramming of a very fundamental human physiological animal program that says, I'm going to fight this thing whenever something new or unknown comes. So with energy and different sensations, the encouragement is to breathe, to get yourself out of that state of arousal, that state of readiness for action. That's step one. The breath is so wonderful that it keeps us going through into other steps, which is to go into that space of allowing, to let things come up, to let us start to move things out that want to move out of our energetic systems that have been stuck. It's like those rocks I was mentioning when I was mentioning Kriyas, right? That's just old energetic pain, emotional pain. Sometimes there's stories in them, sometimes there's not. There could be old actual physical wounds that are stuck that start to resolve themselves as you breathe and you relax and you allow these energetic shifts to start to happen. With the spontaneous awakening, they can happen very rapidly, and it can take a lot of energy. And so it is okay if you don't have a lot of energy for the rest of the world. Kind of like I said, in the more gentler shifts, there's this kind of gentle returning home. Awakening is like being thrown on the ground in your bedroom. It's like, no, you're done until you deal with these deeper issues. But trust is still a type of faith, and the breath can help you calm out of that triggering state, so it's more natural to move into trust, whereas that part that's really triggering the fight or flight mechanism has no trust at all. Let me know if that was helpful, and thank you for the question. You're welcome. What other energy questions do people have, or experiences they'd like to share? Because energy can happen anywhere. So it's like there's never really a place where I can say, oh, this is energy, this isn't. It's all energy. So tingles and shivers, and when I get cold, that's usually a sign I'm low energy. When I'm hot, that means there's a lot of energy moving. It's pretty consistent for me in that regard. There's a lot of newness when you go into expansion. And that can be kind of an interesting experience where suddenly you're feeling different things that are open that you're not used to feeling open before. And so the encouragement again is to breathe and to relax into the space to get used to it. In awakening, there's always my encouragement to go within and take care of yourself first before taking care of others. I wrote a blog and shared it again recently. It's an older one. It's called Sharing Your Joy Properly. which speaks to this point that there are times to share outwards with the world, but when you're going through your own shifts, you need all your energy for yourself to work through some of these places that would otherwise not want to get worked out. That's one of the things that I'm definitely coming to 7.5 years since my initial awakening, is just how fortunate I was, how persistent the energy inside me was, how much smarter that part of me was compared to the ego self of me, because there are some nasty, hardcore things inside of me that were not going to go away. They just weren't, unless they got jackhammered, and they did. Now there's this quality of openness and ease and growing stability that I can speak to experientially rather than intuitively. Because some of you may realize this, that some of the stuff that I say is intuitive and not experiential, means I haven't experienced something I'm sharing, and other things I've experienced. That's the beautiful thing about practicing with your intuition, is you don't actually have to experience everything to know it. And actually, in the latter stages of our spiritual growth, we start to move into spaces that go after the experience. And after experience is that space of oneness that the energy is already part of, where we no longer need experiences of any particular kind. We can just enjoy what's arising. Kavita says, thank you for sharing your experiences. You're welcome. Hi, Elizabeth. When I feel resistance, I'm not sure how to engage it. Is it compassion or is it firmness or both? So it's both, right? The loving kindness to be firm, to be dedicated, and to go in and to go out of it. So think of it like at certain times we take a deep breath. That's what I do in my sessions, really. It's like that's a chance to take a deep breath and for a student to drop down into it with me, right? That's firmness and compassion and love all rolled up. And then after that, you come back out, right? You catch your breath. And some of my students, they're very energetically sensitive to me. They drop in really quick. And it's just amazing how much can move in a half hour. And then you drop in that hard, then I start raising them back up again, right? Coming out of that particular energetic intensity to catch their breath and to relax and be like, oh, okay, here I am again, right? And then to adjust to the shift, because it's like each time we break something open, we do gain a little bit more of our natural innate power. Energy is power, right? Things move and shift around us the more we're grounded in the space. Some of you feel that with me. Am I actually trying to shift you or clear your energy? No, I'm just being me. But there's a power to it. And you know that over like thousands of miles, whether you're in Western Australia, right? If you're energetically sensitive, you can feel it talking to me now, or if you're in Pennsylvania, or if you're in Michigan, or wherever you happen to be, Texas. But I can only encourage all of you towards dedication, because some of this stuff, as I said, is not going to want to come out, and it's not going to be an easy ride. But in breaking through those old gnarly, nasty karmic crap that you've inherited from your mother and your father, and energetically, or however it got there, is just so liberating. Hi, Sean. Is Kundalini energy something that was always there to some degree and just gets amplified during awakening, or is it something dormant that is new when it breaks through? I don't even want to answer that question. I don't know. Because to me, if we're saying it's dormant, that means like you almost have no energy, right? Ever, but we're alive. I know how they talk about it in some of those communities, and they're very specific around Kundalini, and so that's why I usually don't talk about it in that sense. But there are certain qualities of like flowering, right? It's like there's energy inherently in that seed, and that seed, when it sprouts, becomes a whole other different thing. There's already energy in the caterpillar, right? If we're going to use another metaphor. So maybe that's better for the Kundalini. Think of the Kundalini not as dormant, but as a caterpillar. I think that's going to be my metaphorical breakthrough for Kundalini tonight, Sean. So thank you for helping me get there. Think of it as a caterpillar, right? It's one way, but when you awaken, it becomes a butterfly, or rather, it starts you going through the process of butterflyification. So in that way, this is obviously a Jim Tolles way of explaining it, and if you talk to anybody in Kundalini yoga world, they're not going to say what I'm saying right now, and that's fine. We all have different expressions. But in that way, energy is still inherently there, but it does change shape, right? So that sense of that constant change I was mentioning at the beginning of our time together really, I think, works well with that particular metaphor to understand that it's just changing shape into a more mature aspect of something you already are. Let me know if that's useful for you, Sean. Butterflyification. Hi, Shirley. I have a very high energy level. My body temperature runs very hot. I also have people who are very uncomfortable around me. I can walk in a room and feel the type of energy that is in a room, which I've had to learn to deal with as negative energy can take over from me. Well, Shirley, it just sounds like you're one of my highly sensitive people. And so the highly sensitive people talk that I always give around that is that you have to do your own inner work. The more inner work you do for yourself, the clearer you are and the less negative energy can do anything to you. That negative energy needs something inside you to latch onto. If there's nothing to hook onto, it's just going to run right past you because there's all types of energies. And I don't even like to get into negative and positive energies too much. It's too dualistic. It's too much of the ego saying good, bad. It's like when we say things like that. I usually prefer light and dense energy because we don't have the same connotations around it. And then we're less likely to be kind of upset. So being around, let's say, a lot of dense energy, it has that quality of kind of pulling you down to its energetic level. It's almost like chemistry and physics with electrons, right? Electrons will naturally sink to the lowest energy level they can get to. This is just the basics of that world. So to stay up at a higher vibration, you need more energy to stay up there. Conversely, when you talk to someone like me, there's that tendency because I am grounded in my space, but at a high frequency, and this is just starting to sound too new agey for me, it does pull you. It pulls you in this direction. But the greater point is to be rooted in our own energetic center. That we're going to flow. We're going to be interacting with all of life because we are part of all of life. So we don't get away from other densities and other lightness. It just doesn't bother us as much. It's just like, oh, here's a dense area of energy. This person is working very dense energy. And because there's less and less that we're upset about, we've dealt with our own pain. That's the matching density that will connect to that, in which will start to, drain you. It doesn't bother you as much. And then, of course, it's being energy sensitive is just a gift that you just can kind of sense what's going on. And because you can sense what's going on, you can trust it and you see opportunities that others might not see. Let me know if that's helpful, Shirley. And thanks for the questions. I'm glad you like the butterflyification metaphor, Sean, with the caterpillar. What else is on people's minds tonight? Energy really is neither good nor bad. It just keeps changing form. Where we usually get in trouble is when we're trying to hold on to form. That's the big thing in awakening, right? We try to hold on to who we think we are, even though it's getting blown up. Hi, Shirley. I found that being in nature and doing Tai Chi helps me a lot, and has helped me from being pulled into other people's negativity. That's good, but that's still not going into your issues. So that to me is like one layer of self-care. It's an important level of self-care. I definitely like to go into nature. I like my yoga practice and my meditation that centers me. But, the issues that I've released from within me are hugely more helpful because that's kind of like holes in your milk carton, Shirley. So any issue you have, to change your metaphor, is like a hole in your milk carton. And so the milk starts to kind of dribble out. And in some places, it kind of gets pulled out, absorbed out even quicker when you've got those holes in your milk carton. The bigger thing here that I'm pointing to is to not get caught up in what the external world is doing wrong, because that's kind of what we tend to do if we're saying something's negative or bad or wrong or upsetting. We're trying to blame the external world for internal feelings. the more mature we become on the spiritual path, we understand that outside things do influence us, but the greater choices are always our own. The greater choices is how we're going to respond to what we're feeling. And whenever any of you feel drained in any sort of way, in any situation, that's an opportunity to look for a hole in your milk carton. Say, what part of me is feeling drained? And I've been working a lot more with people around sourcing the pain in their bodies. And so if you're already sensitive to yourself, it's not that difficult to actually take that next step and say, well, where do I feel drained? It's like, oh, it's actually kind of in my heart, or it's in my gut. Right? Those are common ones, right? So then you start to say, well, what's happening here? What's my piece in this puzzle? We always own our piece first. We can't wait for the rest of the world to own any of their pieces because by and large, they're not going to. By and large, all of you who are sitting with me here today are on a whole other page, and you need to be the example for others, not the other way around, not waiting around for other people to be less dense and lost in unconsciousness. They need the example. If you don't do that for them, then this isn't like going out and telling other people how to live. It's just being the example. Then they're not going to learn. And people will stay in their cycles of pain and suffering because we just kind of reciprocate what we see. We practice what we see. And so these are these negative feedback loops, unfortunately using the word negative, but in this case, let's call it just the unhealthy feedback loops that we get stuck in. Hey, Elizabeth. I wondered about fear of death, and what came to me was that it wasn't fear of death, it was fear of being separate from source. That was the basic fear. Can you speak to that? Well, we're never separate from source. That's the beauty of energy, right? That's the beauty of what happens in those awakened moments and those initial awakenings where you suddenly realize you're not separate at all. That the whole idea that you're separate is an illusion. The fear of death, is a lot of different things, right? Remember, like the body commands a lot of power. The ego may cover up these issues, but the body, in my experience, has two main things it cares about: survival. So that's the fear of death. So a fundamental biological ultimatum, and it is an ultimatum, is you need to survive. And we in the Western world think, oh no, I don't really have that. I'd be okay with death. And that's because most of the time we're not being confronted by that fear of death, not like other parts of the world. And then the second one is to have kids, which is to continue the species. And that underlies all the whole soulmate, getting married, and different methodologies, why society focuses primarily on heterosexual unions, right? That's all coming from that other ultimatum. So I'm pointing to these things because to me the fear of death comes from that biological thing ultimately, and the ego responds to that, right? So the ego was ultimately layers and layers built up on top of that core particular ultimatum. And so then we're afraid of losing form, and the ego does lose form the more we drop into the spiritual space of oneness that's already here. So it is ultimately that there are parts of that have to die, but that doesn't mean the body has to die. But the deeper we go, being at peace with the fact that the body is going to die is a profound thing, because it's going against that deeper biological drive to stay alive for as long as we can. So I don't think we really care that much about being separate from source. I just don't think it's how we're built. That to me sounds like it's still the mind trying to kind of self-assure. I mean, the fear of death is a big thing. That's why, a lot of military training is so hard. They're trying to break down that issue in people, so that, when bombs and guns and people are screaming and stuff are going off, people don't just bolt, which, in all honesty, might not be a bad thing. If everybody just bolted every time things got like that with war, then maybe we'd stop having wars. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but that's part of the powerful retraining. And for those of you who haven't read it already, I wrote a blog this last May about, retraining the animal within. That really speaks to this, because once again, It's all energy, but we also want to honor every aspect of that. And the body is the most dense form of our energy, and it has powerful commands. We have to honor that. Fear of death is not just a thought. Thanks, Kavitha. I appreciate everybody's questions and comments today. If anyone hasn't asked a question, we're coming up on our last 10 minutes together. So feel free to ask whatever you want. Obviously, if you're one of my students, you'll see me again soon enough anyway, so I'm sure you can ask questions then at our next session. And if anybody who's new to me doesn't realize this, but I do one-on-one sessions via Skype, unless you're in the San Francisco Bay Area here in California. Elizabeth says, thank you so much for addressing that. You're welcome. I try to keep this as grounded as possible because there's a lot of escapism that happens, or attempted escapism, and spiritual bypassing is being attempted in the world of spirituality, but it doesn't work because we can't get away from ourselves. We can self-insulate. That's an interesting aspect, right? And this is a big problem with energetically sensitive people, is a lot of self-insulating. Now, I don't think it's bad to like get away from lots of density. Like, I don't particularly say that I want to go live in, certain parts of downtown Oakland. Like, it's a very dense, heavy energy. It's not nourishing to me. But if we let these energetic influences define our lives, then we're shrinking, right? We're contracting in an unhealthy manner and cutting ourselves off from life. And life has many different tools of teaching. And for those of us who are energetically sensitive, that's actually a faster form of teaching. Learning energetically is one of the quickest ways we learn. And so those who are sensitive to me, like, you have an opportunity to energetically learn things at a deeper level more quickly. And a lot of those things you don't necessarily immediately realize. But that's the beauty of energy. And so when we're getting drained, that's just a different type of teaching. It says there's a hole in your bucket, and there's an issue here to look at, because there's obviously something on some level that you want here from this particular situation, person, place. And so as we get better at figuring that out, then we plug up the holes in our bucket. I think we have time for a couple more questions. Sharing my latest blog post is 9 Truths to Live By. Just underneath my little box here. I tried to make some of these spiritual truths I've been mentioning today more approachable, right? Because when we say we're all connected, we're all one, what does that really mean on an everyday basis? So if you haven't checked that out already, I recommend it. And then, as I mentioned earlier, for anyone who wants to donate, here's a little donation button that I'm highlighting in fancy dancy yellow. Ultimately, we're all energy. And so it's amazing what you start to learn to interpret the clearer you are in yourself. And interpreting energy really is that practice with intuition, to trust the first things that are coming to you. And so the more you trust that first sort of sense, the image, just the overall feel of what's coming to you, then the more quickly you're just like, oh, this is what this is what's going on. And what's nice too is, like, usually life seems to give you a few levels of confirmation that when you talk to somebody and say, this is what I'm feeling from you or in the situation, somebody shares back, oh yeah, that is what's going on for me, or something like that. Hi, Elizabeth. How do you know when you're lying to yourself? That's a broad question. Usually you are you're in some level of resistance. So look for physical resistance, emotional resistance. Look for a story that you're trying to believe in, because the truth doesn't need a story to believe in. You are here. That's enough. Another comment from Shirley. I recently purchased Healing the Addictive Personality, Freeing Yourself from Addictive Patterns and Relationships by Dr. Lee Jampolsky, which talks about those who have fears, etc. It is a very interesting book as it also teaches about the truth personality. Thanks for sharing, Shirley. Hi, Kavitha. Good analogy, hole in the bucket. But how do we discern fatigue from energetically drained, or are they the same? Well, I think, that goes back to what I was saying about Western culture, Kavitha, where we are putting ourselves in places of self-depletion. So that's always going to be step one, to really start to know, am I energetically drained or am I not sleeping well? Do I have sleep apnea? Am I not eating well? Am I not eating the right foods? We live in a time where people are using the words nutrient dense. Do you know how ridiculous that word is? No other time in humanity have we needed a term like nutrient dense, because it was all nutrient dense. The fact that we have nutrient light food that doesn't have enough nutrients in it or much nutrients at all, is absolutely bizarre, because food is supposed to nourish us. So I'm just pointing back to these things: working too much, doing too much. Doing too much is a huge issue in the United States, where we're just driving ourselves crazy to achieve something that we don't even really fully understand what we're trying to achieve. So through that sort of exhaustion, then we're automatically tired and drained, and then you can put yourself in dense situations to be an energetically sensitive person, and it just gets 10 times worse because you're already out. And you don't have enough energy to really go into your inner work, really. So that to me is step one. Now, if you do that and you're not overworking, you're eating well and you're sleeping well and that type of thing, then you start to look into it and say, okay, so when do I feel energetically drained? Because if it's all the time, with the exception of the full awakening stuff that I've been through and a couple of you others who are here have been through, it's just so unlikely that it's going to be all the time for most people. So situationally, it'll start to show you different things about how you're interacting. And another big aspect of draining yourself is actually just closing down. Because when you close down yourself, you are no longer part of the greater ocean of life. And that's a far bigger flow to connect to. So open-heartedness is the most nourishing way to be. Well, I'm glad you found some truth there, Kavitha. So any last questions? Have time for probably one more. Anyone who hasn't asked? Yeah, that's right. Hole in the bucket being hole in the bucket. I like that. Shirley, nutrient dense is another form of putting fear into people. We have to listen to our body to feed it with the food that it needs. Sometimes you may learn by trial and error. It is no different than the world saying that you need sleep. Well, whatever you need for sleep is fine. Nutrient dense has just come out of the fact that a lot of our foods aren't. So that's what it's referring to. And my point is that we don't need to be eating food that's ever nutrient light. It just doesn't make sense. It's not healthy. So these are my thoughts about energy today. Thanks everyone for joining me, for commenting, for sharing, for asking questions. I hope there's been useful things here for you. And if anything doesn't resonate, let it wash away. If something does activate and rubs against you the wrong way, see what's being rubbed on and see if you can learn from it. So as Kavitha just said, you can take care of the hole in the bucket and become whole, W-H-O-L-E, in your own self. Thanks and have a great night, everyone. Or morning.